moved to Adullam and lived there with a man named Hira. There he met and married a Canaanite girl, the daughter of Shua. They lived at Chezib and had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. These names were given to them by their mother, except for who was named by his father. When his oldest son, grew up, Judah arranged for him to marry a girl named Tamar. But was a wicked man, and so the Lord killed him. Jesus. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, "You must marry Tamar as our law requires of a dead man's brother, so that her sons from you will be your brother's heir." But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be counted as his own. And so although he married her, whenever he went in to sleep with her, he spilled the sperm on the bed to prevent her from having a baby, which would be his brother's. So far as the Lord was concerned, it was very wrong of him to deny a child to his deceased brother, so he killed him too. Then Judah told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, not to marry again at that time, but to return to her childhood home and to her parents, and to remain a widow there until his youngest son, Shelah, was old enough to marry her. But he didn't really intend for Shelah to do this for fear God would kill him too, just as he had his 2 brothers. So Tamar went home to her parents. In the process of time, Judah's wife died. After the mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira the Adullamite went to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. When someone told Tamar that her father-in-law had left for the shearing at Timnah, and realizing by now that she was not going to be permitted to marry Shelah, though he was fully grown, she laid aside her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enim, which is on the way to Timnah. Judah noticed her as he went by and thought she was a prostitute, since her face was veiled. So he stopped and propositioned her to sleep with him, not realizing, of course, that this was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay me?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat for my flock," he promised. "What pledge will you give me so that I can be sure you will send it?" she asked. "Well, what do you want?" he required. "Your identification seal and your walking stick," she replied. So he gave them to her, and she let him come and sleep with her, and she became pregnant as a result. Afterwards, she resumed wearing her widow's clothing as usual. Judah asked his friend Hira the Adullamite to take the young goat back to her and to pick up the pledges he had given her, but Hira couldn't find her. So he asked around of the men of the city, "Where does the prostitute live who was soliciting out beside the road at the entrance of the village?" "But we've never had a public prostitute here," they replied. So he returned to Judah and told him he couldn't find her anywhere, and what the men of the place had told him. "Then let her keep them," Judah exclaimed. "We tried our best. We'd be the laughing stock of the town to go back again." About 3 months later, word reached Judah that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, was pregnant, obviously as a result of prostitution. "Bring her out and burn her," Judah shouted. Ooh, the hypocrite. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. "The man who owns this identification seal and walking stick is the father of my child. Do you recognize them?" Judah admitted that they were his and said, "She is more right than I am because I refused to keep my promise to give her my son Shelah," but he did not marry her. In due season, the time of delivery arrived, and she had 2 sons. As they were being born, the midwife tied a scarlet thread around the wrist of the child who appeared first. But he drew back his hand, and the baby was actually the first to be born. "Where did you come from?" she exclaimed. And ever after he was called Perez, meaning bursting out. Then soon afterwards, the baby with the scarlet thread on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. The book of Genesis, chapter 39. When Joseph arrived in Egypt as a captive of the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased from them by Potiphar, a member of the personal staff of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now this man Potiphar was the captain of the king's bodyguard and his chief executioner. The Lord greatly blessed Joseph there in the home of his master, so that everything he did succeeded. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph in a special way. So Joseph naturally became quite a favorite with him. So he was put in charge of the administration of Potiphar's household and all of his business affairs. At once the Lord began blessing Potiphar for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs began to run smoothly. His crops flourished and his flocks multiplied. So Potiphar gave Joseph, the complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. He had no worry in the world with Joseph there except to decide what he wanted to eat. Joseph, by the way, was a very handsome young man. One day at about this time, Potiphar's wife began making eyes at Joseph and suggested that he come and sleep with her. Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in the entire household. He himself has no more authority than I have. He has held back nothing from me except you yourself because you are his wife. How can I do such a wicked thing as this? It would be a great sin against God." But she kept on with her suggestions day after day, even though he refused to listen, and kept her out of the way as much as possible. And one day as he was in the house going about his work, as it happened, no one else was around at that time. She came and grabbed him by the sleeve, demanding, "Sleep with me." He tore himself away, but as he did, his jacket slipped off, and she was left holding it as he fled from the house. When she saw that she had his jacket and that he had fled, she began screaming. And when the other men around the place came running in to see what had happened, she was crying hysterically. My husband had to bring in this Hebrew slave to insult us, she sobbed. He tried to rape me, you old lying wonder. He tried to rape me, but when I screamed, he ran and forgot to take his jacket. She kept the jacket when her husband came home that night. She told him her story. That Hebrew slave you've had around here tried to rape me, and I was only saved by my screams. He fled, leaving this jacket behind. Well, when her husband heard his wife's story, he was furious. He threw Joseph into prison where the king's prisoners were kept in chains. But the Lord was with Joseph there too and was kind to him by granting him favor with the chief jailer. In fact, the jailer soon handed over the entire prison administration to Joseph, so that all the other prisoners were responsible to him. The chief jailer had no more worries after that, for Joseph took care of everything, and the Lord was with him, so that everything ran smoothly and well. Genesis 40:1. Sometime later, it so happened that the king of Egypt became angry with both his chief baker and his chief butler, so that he jailed both in the prison where Joseph was, in the castle of Potiphar, the captain of the guard, who was chief executioner. They remained under arrest there for quite some time, and Potiphar assigned Joseph to wait on them. One night, each one of them had a dream. The next morning, Joseph noticed that he looked dejected and sad. What in the world is the matter, he asked, and they replied, we both had dreams last night, but there's no one here to tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Tell me what you saw. The butler told his dream first. In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon there were clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed the juice into it and gave it to him to drink. I know what the dream means, Joseph said. The 3 branches mean 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh is going to take you out of prison and give you back your job again as his chief butler. And please have some pity on me when you are back in his favor, and mention me to Pharaoh and ask him to let me out of here. For I was kidnapped from my homeland among the Hebrews, and now this. Here I am in jail when I did nothing to deserve it. When the chief baker saw that the first dream had such a good meaning, he told his dream to Joseph too. In my dream, he said, there were 3 baskets of pastries on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of bakery goods for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them. 3 baskets means 3 days, Joseph told him. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will take off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will come and pick off your flesh. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later. He held a party for all of his officials and household staff. He sent for his chief butler and chief baker, and they were brought in to him from the prison. Then he restored the chief butler to his former position, but he sentenced the chief baker to be impaled, just as Joseph has predicted. Pharaoh's wine taster, however, promptly forgot all about Joseph, never giving him a thought. Ooh, that's the devil. Genesis 41:1. One night, 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River, when suddenly 7 sleek, fat cows came up out of the river and began grazing in the grass. Then 7 other cows came up from the river, but they were very skinny and all their ribs stood out. They went over and stood beside the fat cows. Then the skinny cows ate the fat ones, at which point Pharaoh woke up. Soon he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain on one stalk, with every kernel well formed and plump. Then suddenly 7 more heads appeared on the stalk, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up and realized it was all a dream. Next morning, as he thought about it, he became very concerned as to what the dreams might mean. He called for all the magicians and sages of Egypt and told them about it, but not one of them could suggest what his dream meant. Then the king's wine taster spoke up. Today I remember my sin, he said. I bet you did. Some time ago, when you were angry with a couple of us and put me and the chief baker in jail in the castle of the captain of the guard, the chief baker and I each had a dream one night. We told the dreams to a young Hebrew fellow. There was a slave of the captain of the guard, and he told us what our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he said. I was restored to my position of wine taster, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent at once for Joseph. He brought him hastily from the dungeon, and after a quick shave and change of clothes, came in before Pharaoh. I had a dream last night, Pharaoh told him, and none of these men can tell me what it means, but I've heard that you can interpret dreams, and that is why I've called for you. I can't do it by myself, Joseph replied, but God will tell you what it means. So Pharaoh told him the dream. I was standing upon the bank of the Nile River, he said, when suddenly 7 fat, healthy-looking cows came out of the river and began grazing along the riverbank. But then 7 other cows came up from the river, very skinny and bony. In fact, I've never seen such poor-looking specimens in all the land of Egypt. And these skinny cattle ate up the 7 fat ones that came out first. And afterward, they were still skinny as before. Then I woke up. A little later, I had another dream. This time, there were 7 heads of grain on one stalk, and all 7 heads were plump and full. Then out of the same stalk came 7 withered thin heads, and the thin heads swallowed up the fat ones. I told all of this to my magicians, but not one of them could tell me the meaning. Both dreams are the same thing, Both dreams mean the same thing, Joseph told Pharaoh. God was telling you what he's going to do here in the land of Egypt. The 7 fat cows and also the 7 fat, well-formed heads of grain mean that there are 7 years of prosperity ahead. The 7 skinny cows and also the 7 thin and withered heads of grain indicate that there will be 7 years of famine following the 7 years of prosperity. So God has showed you what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout all the land of Egypt. But afterward, there will be 7 years of famine so great that all prosperity will be forgotten and wiped out. Famine will consume the land. The famine will be so terrible that even the memory of the good years will be erased. The double dream gives double impact, showing that what I've told you is certainly going to happen. For God has decreed it, and it's going to happen soon. My suggestion is that you find the wisest man in Egypt and put him in Egypt and put him in charge of administering a nationwide farm program. Let Pharaoh divide Egypt into 5 administrative districts and let the officials of these districts gather into the royal storehouses all the excess crops of the next 7 years, so that there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come. Otherwise, disaster will surely strike. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his assistants. As they discussed who should be appointed for the job, Pharaoh said, "Who could do a better job than Joseph? For he is a man who is obviously filled with the Spirit of God." Turning to Joseph, Pharaoh said to him, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, you are the wisest man in the country. I'm hereby appointing you to be in charge of this entire project. What you say goes throughout all the land of Egypt. I alone will outrank you." My God. Then Pharaoh placed his own signet ring on Joseph's finger as a token of his authority and dressed him in beautiful clothing and placed the royal gold chain about his neck and declared, "See, I have placed you in charge of all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh also gave Joseph the chariot of his second in command, and wherever he went, the shout arose, "Kneel down." And Pharaoh declared to Joseph, "I, the king of Egypt, swear that you will have complete charge over all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh gave him a name, meaning he has the godlike power of life and death. And he gave him a wife, a girl named Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of Heliopolis. So Joseph became famous throughout all the land of Egypt. He was 30 years old as he entered the service of the king. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and began traveling all across the land. And sure enough, for the next 7 years, there were bumper crops everywhere. During those years, Joseph requisitioned for the government a portion of all the crops grown throughout Egypt, storing them in nearby cities. After 7 years of this, granaries were full to overflowing. There was so much that no one kept track of the amount. During this time, before the arrival of the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of the sun god Re of Heliopolis. Joseph named his oldest son Manasseh, meaning made to forget. What he meant was that God made him to forget all the anguish of his youth and for the loss of his father's home. The second boy was named Ephraim, meaning fruitful, for God had made me fruitful in this land of my slavery, he said. So at last the 7 years of plenty came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. There were crop failures in all the surrounding countries too, but in Egypt there was plenty of grain in the storehouses. The people began to starve. They pleaded with Pharaoh for food, and he sent them to Joseph. "Do whatever he tells you," he instructed them. So now, with severe famine all over the land, Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians and to those from other lands who came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. Genesis 42. When Jacob heard that there was grain available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I've heard that there's grain available in Egypt. Go down and buy some for us before we all starve to death." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. However, Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them for fear some harm might happen to him as it had to his brother Joseph. So it was that Israel's sons arrived in Egypt along with many others from many lands to buy food, for the famine was as severe in Canaan as it was everywhere else. Since Joseph was governor over all Egypt and in charge of the sale of the grain, it was to him that his brothers came and bowed low before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph recognized him instantly, but he pretended he didn't. "Where are you from?" he demanded roughly. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We've come to buy grain." Then Joseph remembered the dreams of long ago. He said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see how destitute the famine has made our land." "No, no," they exclaimed. "We have come to buy food. We're all brothers and honest men, sir." "Yeah, right. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," he insisted. "You have come to see how weak we are." "Sir," they said, "there are 12 of us brothers, and our father is in the land of Canaan. Our younger brother is there with our father, and one of our brothers is dead." "So," Joseph asked, "what does that prove? You are spies. This is the way I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you are not going to leave Egypt until this younger brother comes here. One of you go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here bound in prison. Then we'll find out whether your story is true or not. If it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies." So he threw them all into jail for 3 days. See, that's what you get. The third day, Joseph said to them, I'm a God-fearing man, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove yourselves. I'm going to take a chance that you're honorable. Only one of you shall remain in chains in jail, and the rest of you may go on home with grain for your families. But bring your youngest brother back to me. And this way I will know whether you are telling me the truth, and if you are, I will spare you. To this they all agreed. Speaking among themselves, they said, this has all happened because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his terror and anguish and heard his pleadings, but we wouldn't listen. Oh, that's terrible. That's evil. Didn't I tell you not to do it, Reuben asked, but you wouldn't listen, and now we're going to die because we murdered him. Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them as he was standing there, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. Now he left the room and found a place where he could weep. My God. Returning, he selected Simeon from among them and had him bound before their eyes. Joseph then ordered his servants to fill the men's sack with grain, but also gave secret instructions to put each brother's payment at the top of his sack. He also gave them provisions for their journey. So they loaded up their donkeys with the grain and started home. But when they stopped for the night and one of them opened his sack to get some grain to feed the donkeys, there was his money in the mouth of the sack. Look, he exclaimed to his brothers, my money is here in my sack. They were filled with terror. Trembling, they exclaimed to each other, what is this that God has done to us? Well, you know what it is. So they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened. The king's chief assistant spoke very roughly to us, they told him, and took us for spies. No, we said, we are honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is dead, and the youngest is with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man told us, this is the way I will find out if you are who you claim to be. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take grain for your families and go home. But bring your youngest brother back to me. Then I shall know whether you are spies or honest men. If you prove to be what you say, then I will give you back your brother, and you can come as often as you like to purchase grain. As they emptied out their sacks, there at the top of each was the money paid for the grain. Terror gripped them as it did their father. Then Jacob exclaimed, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph didn't come back. Simeon is gone. And now you want to take Benjamin too. Everything has been against me. Then Reuben said to his father, kill my 2 sons. What? Let's read that again. Verse 37. Then Reuben said to his father, kill my 2 sons. If I don't bring Benjamin back to you, I'll be responsible for him. Oh, this is terrible. Yes, goes from bad to worse. But Jacob replied, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother Joseph is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children. If anything should happen to him, I would die. Genesis chapter 43, verse 1. But there was no relief from the terrible famine throughout the land. When the grain they had bought from Egypt was almost gone, their father said to them, go again and buy us a little food. But Judah told him the man wasn't fooling one bit when he said, don't ever come back again unless your brother is with you. We cannot go unless Benjamin goes with us. Why did you ever tell him you had a brother? Israel moaned. Why did you have to treat me like that? But the man specifically asked us about our family, they told him. He wanted to know whether our father was still living, and he asked if we had another brother. So we told him. How could we know that he was going to say, bring me your brother? Judah said to his father, send the lad with me, and we'll be on our way. Otherwise, we will die of starvation. And not only we, but you and all our little ones. I guarantee his safety. If I don't bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame forever. For we could have gone and returned by this time if you had let him come. Ooh, that's smart, Alex. So their father Israel finally said to them, if it can't be avoided, then at least do this. Load your donkeys with the best products of the land. Take them to the man as gifts: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double money so that you can pay back what was in the mouths of your sacks, as it was probably someone's mistake. And take your brother and go. May God Almighty give you mercy before the man, so that he will release Simeon and return Benjamin. And if I must bear the anguish of their deaths, then so be it. So they took the gifts and the double money and went to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, he said to the manager of his household, these men will eat with me this noon. Take them home and prepare a big feast. So the man did as he was told and took them to Joseph's palace. They were badly frightened when they saw where they were being taken. It's because of the money returned to us in our sacks, they said. He wants to pretend we stole it and seize us as slaves with our donkeys. As they arrived at the entrance of the palace, they went over to Joseph's household manager and said to him, oh, sir, after our first trip to Egypt to buy food as we were returning home, we stopped for the night and opened our sacks, and the money was there that we had paid for the grain. Here it is. We brought it back again, along with additional money to buy more grain. We have no idea how the money got into our sacks. Don't worry about it, the household manager told them. Your God, even the God of your fathers, must have put it there, for we collected your money all right. Then he released Simeon and brought him out to them. They were then conducted into the palace and given fresh water to refresh their feet, and their donkeys were fed. Then they got their presents ready for Joseph's arrival at noon, for they were told that they would be eating there. When Joseph came home, they gave him their presents, bowing low before him. He asked, how had they been getting along? And how is your father, the old man you spoke about? Is he still alive? Yes, they replied, he's alive and well. Then again they bowed before him. Looking at his brother Benjamin, he asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? How are you, my son? God be gracious to you. Then Joseph made a hasty exit, for he was overcome with love for his brother and had to go out and cry. Going into his bedroom, he wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, keeping himself under control. Let's eat, he said. Joseph ate by himself, and his brothers were served at a separate table, and the Egyptians at still another, for Egyptians despise Hebrews and never eat with them. He told each of them where to sit and seated them in order of their ages, from the oldest to the youngest, much to their amazement. Their food was served to them from his own table. He gave the largest serving to Benjamin, 5 times as much as any of the others. They had a wonderful time bantering back and forth, and the wine flowed freely. Genesis 44. When his brothers were ready to leave, Joseph ordered his household manager to fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they could carry, and to put into the mouth of each man's sack the money he had paid. He was also told to put Joseph's own silver cup at the top of Benjamin's sack along with the grain money. So the household manager did as he was told. The brothers were up at dawn and on their way with their loaded donkeys. But when they were barely out of the city, Joseph said to his household manager, chase after them and stop them, and asked them why they're acting like this when their benefactor had been so kind to them. Asked him, what do you mean by stealing my Lord's personal silver drinking cup, which he uses for fortune telling? What a wicked thing you have done. So he caught up with them and spoke to them along the lines he had been instructed. What in the world are you talking about? They demanded. What kind of people do you think we are, that you accuse us of such a terrible thing as that? Didn't we bring back the money we found in the mouth of our sacks? Why would we steal gold from your master's house? If you find his cup with any of us, let that one die, and all the rest of us will be slaves forever to your master. Fair enough, the man replied, except that only the one who stole it will be a slave, and the rest of you can go free. They quickly took down their sacks from the backs of their donkeys and opened them. He began searching the oldest brother's sack, going on down the line to the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's. They ripped their clothing in despair, loaded the donkeys again, and returned to the city. Joseph was still home when Judah and his brothers arrived, and they fell to the ground before him. What were you trying to do? Joseph demanded. Do you know that such a man as I would know who stole it? And Judah said, oh, what shall we say to my Lord? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins. Sir, we have all returned to be your slave. Both we and he who sacked the cup was found. No, Joseph said, only the man who stole the cup, he should be my slave. The rest of you can go on home to your father. Then Judah stepped forward and said, oh, sir, let me just say this one word to you. Be patient with me for a moment, for I know you can doom me in an instant as though you were Pharaoh himself. Sir, you asked us if we had a father or brother, and we said, yes, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him very much. And you said to us, bring him here so that I can see him. But we said to you, sir, the lad cannot leave his father, for his father would die. But you told us, don't come back here unless your youngest brother is with you. So we returned to our father and told him what you had said. And when he said, go back again and buy us a little food, we replied, we can't unless you let our youngest brother go with us. Only then we may come. Then my father said to us, you know that my wife had 2 sons, and that one of them went away and never returned, doubtless torn to pieces by some wild animal. I've never seen him since. And if you take away his brother from me also, and any harm befalls him, I shall die with sorrow. And now, sir, if I go back to my father and the lad is not with us, seeing that our father's life is bound up in the lad's life, when he sees the boy is not with us, our father will die. And we will be responsible for bringing down his gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Sir, I pledged my father that I would take care of the lad. I told him if I don't bring him back to you, I shall bear the blame forever. Please, sir, let me stay here as a slave instead of the lad, and let the lad return with his brothers. For how shall I return to my father if the lad is not with me? I cannot bear to see what this would do to him. Genesis chapter 45, verse 1. Joseph could not stand it any longer. Joseph could not stand it no longer. Out, all of you, he cried to his attendants, and he was left alone with his brothers. Then he wept aloud. His sobs could be heard throughout the palace, and the news was quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers couldn't say a word, for they were stunned with surprise. I bet you were. Come over here, he said. So they came closer, and he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But don't be angry with yourselves that you did this to me, for God did it. Wow. He sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Those 2 years of famine will grow to 7, during which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God has sent me here to keep you and your families alive so that you will become a great nation. Yes, it was God who sent me here, not you. And he has made me a counselor to Pharaoh and the manager of this entire nation, ruler of the land of Egypt. Hurry, return to my father and tell him your son Joseph says, God has made me chief of all the land of Egypt. Come down to me right away. You shall live in the land of Goshen so that you can be near me with all your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and all that you have. I will take care of you from there. You men are witnesses of my promise, and my brother Benjamin has heard me say it. For there's still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you will come to utter poverty along with your household. Tell our father about all my power here in Egypt and how everyone obeys me, and bring him to me quickly. Then weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin began weeping too. And he did the same with each of his brothers, who finally found their tongues. The news soon reached Pharaoh. Joseph's brothers have come, and Pharaoh was very happy to hear it, as were his officials. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers to load their pack animals and return quickly to their homes in Canaan, and to bring your father Joseph and all your families and come here to Egypt to live. Tell them, Pharaoh will assign you the very best territory in the land of Egypt. You shall live off the fat of the land. And tell your brothers to take wagons from Egypt to carry their wives and little ones and bring your father here. Don't worry about your property, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and provisions for the journey, and he gave each of them new clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 5 changes of clothes and 300 pieces of silver. He sent his father 10 donkey loads of the good things of Egypt, and 10 donkeys loaded with grain and all kinds of other food to eat on his journey. So he sent his brothers off. Don't quarrel along the way was his parting shot. And leaving, they returned to the land of Canaan to Jacob, their father. Joseph is alive, they shouted to him, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. But Jacob's heart was like a stone. He couldn't take it in. But when they had given him Joseph's messages, and when he saw the wagons filled with food that Joseph had sent him, his spirit revived. And he said, it must be true. Joseph, my son, is alive. I will go and see him before I die. Genesis 46:1. So Israel set out with all his possessions and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices there to the God of his father Isaac. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Yes, Jacob answered. I am God, the voice replied, the God of your father. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will see to it that you become a great nation there. And I will go down with you into Egypt and will bring your descendants back to you. But you shall die in Egypt with Joseph at your side. So Jacob left Beersheba, and his sons brought him to Egypt along with their little ones and their wives in the wagons Pharaoh had provided for them. They brought their livestock too and all their belongings accumulated in the land of Canaan and came to Egypt, Jacob and all his children, sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters, all his loved ones. Here are the names of his sons and grandchildren who went with him into Egypt. Reuben, his oldest son. Reuben's sons, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Simeon and his sons, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul. Shaul's mother was a girl from Canaan. Levi and his sons, Gershon, Kohath, Merari. Judah and his sons, Onan, Shelah, Perez, Zerah. However, and Onan died while still in Canaan before Israel went to Egypt. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Issachar and his sons, Tola, Puva, Iob, Shimron. Zebulun and his sons, Sered, Elon, Jaleel. So these descendants of Jacob and Leah, not including their daughter Dinah, born to Jacob in Padanaram, were 33 in all. Also accompanying him were Gad and his sons, Ziphion, Haggai, Shunai, Esbon, Eri, Arodai, Areli. Asher and his sons, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and his sister Sarah. Beriah's sons were Heber and Machiel. These 16 persons were the sons of Jacob and Zilpah, the slave girl given to Leah by her father Laban. Also in the total of Jacob's household were these 14 sons and descendants of Jacob and Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's sons born in the land of Egypt were Manasseh and Ephraim. Their mother was Asenath, the daughter of Potphera, priest of Heliopolis. Benjamin's sons, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. Also in the group were the 7 sons and descendants of Jacob and Bilhah, the slave girl given to Rachel by her father Laban. Dan and his son, Humshim. Naphtali and his sons, Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shelam. So the total number of those going into Egypt of his own descendants, not counting the wives of Jacob's sons, was 66. With Joseph and his 2 sons included, the total number of people in Jacob's household there in Egypt was 70. Jacob sent Judah on ahead to tell Joseph that they were on the way and would soon arrive in Goshen, which they did. Joseph jumped into his chariot and journeyed to Goshen to meet his father, and they fell into each other's arms and wept a long while. Then Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, for I've seen you again and know you are alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to all their households, I'll go tell Pharaoh that you are here and that you have come from the land of Canaan to join me. And I will tell him, these men are shepherds. They have brought with them their flocks and herds and everything they own. So when Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, tell him, we have been shepherds from our youth, as our fathers have been for many generations. When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the land of Goshen, for shepherds were despised and hated in other parts of Egypt. Genesis 47:1. Upon their arrival, Joseph went in to see Pharaoh. My father and my brothers are here from Canaan, he reported, with all their flocks, herds, and possessions. They wish to settle in the land of Goshen. He took 5 of his brothers with him and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them, what is your occupation? And they replied, we are shepherds like our ancestors. We've come here to live in Egypt, for there is no pasture for our flocks in Canaan. The famine is very bitter there. We request permission to live in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, choose anywhere you like for them to live. Give them the best of the land of Egypt. The land of Goshen will be fine. If any of them are capable, put them in charge of my flocks too. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Wow. How old are you? Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, I've lived 130 long, hard years, and I'm not nearly as old as many of my ancestors. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before he left. So Joseph assigned the best land of Egypt, the land of Ramses, to his father and brothers, just as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph furnished food to them in accordance with the number of their descendants. The famine became worse and worse, so that all the land of Egypt and Canaan was starving. Joseph collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan in exchange for grain, and he brought the money into Pharaoh's treasure houses. When all the people were out of money, they came to Joseph crying again for food. Our money is gone, they said, but give us bread, for why should we die? Well, then Joseph replied, give me your livestock, and I will trade you food in exchange. So they brought their cattle to Joseph in exchange for food. Soon all the horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys of Egypt were in Pharaoh's possession. The next year they came again and said, our money is gone and our cattle is yours, and there's nothing left but our bodies and land. Why should we die? Buy us and our land, and we will be serfs to Pharaoh. We will trade ourselves for food, then we will live, and the land won't be abandoned. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was so severe. All the land became Pharaoh's. Thus all the people of Egypt became Pharaoh's serfs. The only land he didn't buy was that belonging to the priests, for they were assigned food from Pharaoh and didn't need to sell. Then Joseph said to the people, see, I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Here is grain. Go and sow the land. And when you harvest it, 1/5 of everything you get belongs to Pharaoh. Keep 4 parts for yourself to be used for next year's seed and as food for yourselves and for your household and little ones. You've saved our lives, they said. We would gladly be serfs of Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a law throughout all the land of Egypt, and is still the law, that Pharaoh should have his tax 20% of all the crops except those produced on the land owned by the temples. So Israel lived in the land of Goshen in Egypt, and soon the people of Israel began to prosper, and there was a veritable population explosion among them. Jacob lived 17 years after his arrival, so that he was 147 years old at the time of his death. As the time drew near for him to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, swear to me most solemnly that you will honor this, my last request. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I'm dead, take me out of Egypt and bury me beside my ancestors. And Joseph promised, swear that you will do it. Jacob insisted, and Joseph did. Soon afterwards, Jacob took to his bed. Genesis 48. One day not long after this, word came to Joseph that his father was failing rapidly. So taking with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, he went to visit him. When Jacob heard that Joseph had arrived, he gathered his strength and sat up in the bed to greet him and said to him, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, I will make you a great nation and will give you this land of Canaan to you and to your children's children for an everlasting possession. And now, as these 2 sons of yours, Ephraim and Manasseh, born here in the land of Egypt before I arrived, I am adopting them as my own, and they will inherit from me just as Reuben and Simeon will. But any other children born to you shall be your own, and shall inherit Ephraim and Manasseh's portion from you. For your mother Rachel died after only 2 children, when I came from Padanaram, as they were just a short distance from Ephrath, and I buried her beside the road to Bethlehem. Then Israel looked over at the 2 boys. Are these the 2 ones? Are these the ones? He asked. Yes, Joseph told him. These are my sons whom God has given me here in Egypt. And Israel said, bring them over to me, and I will bless them. Israel was half blind with age, so that he could hardly see. So Joseph brought the boys close to him and kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never thought that I would see you again, but now God has let me see your children too. Joseph took the 2 boys by the hand, bowed deeply to him, and led the boys to their grandfather's knees. Ephraim at Israel's left hand, Manasseh at his right hand. But Israel crossed his arms as he stretched them out to lay hands upon the boys' heads, so that his right hand was upon the head of Ephraim, the younger boy, and his left hand upon the head of the head of Manasseh, the older. He did this purposely. Then he blessed Joseph with this blessing. May God, the God of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, the God who has shepherded me all my life, wonderfully bless these boys. He is the angel who has kept me from all harm. May these boys be an honor to my name and to the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they become a mighty nation. But Joseph was upset and displeased when he saw that his father had laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, so he lifted it up and placed it on Manasseh's head instead. No, father, he said, you've got the right hand on the wrong head. Wow. You've got the right hand on the wrong head. Wow. This one over here is the older. Put your right hand on him. But his father refused. I know what I'm doing, my son. He said, Manasseh shall become a great nation, but his younger brother shall become even greater. So Jacob blessed the boys that day with his blessing. May the people of Israel bless each other by saying, God make you as prosperous as Ephraim and Manasseh. Note that he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to Canaan, the land of your fathers. And I've given the choice land of Shechem to you instead of to your brothers, as your portion of that land which I took from the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. Genesis 49:1. Then Jacob called together all his sons and said, gather around me, and I will tell you what is going to happen to you in the days to come. Listen to me, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my oldest son, the child of my vigorous youth. You are the head of the list in rank and honor, but you are unruly as wild waves of the sea. And you shall be first no longer. I am demoting you, for you slept with one of my wives and thus dishonored me. Wow. Simeon and Levi are two of a kind. They are men of violence and injustice. Oh, my soul, stay away from them. May I never be a party to their wicked plans, for in their anger they murdered a man and maimed oxen just for fun. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce and cruel. Therefore I will scatter their descendants throughout all Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. You shall destroy your enemies. Your father's sons will bow before you. Judah is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. He has settled down as a lion. Who will dare to rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes, whom all people shall obey. He has changed his steed to the choicest vine and washed his clothes in wine. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth are whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell on the shores of the sea and shall be a harbor for ships with its borders extending to Sidon. Issachar is a strong beast of burden resting among the saddlebags. When he saw how good the countryside was, how pleasant the land, he willingly bent his shoulder to the task and served his masters with vigor. Dan shall govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. He shall be a serpent in the path that bites the horse's heel so that the rider falls off. I trust in your salvation, Lord. A marauding band shall stamp upon Gad, but he shall rob and pursue them. Asher shall produce rich foods fit for kings. Naphtali is a deer let loose, producing lovely fawns. Joseph is a fruitful tree beside a fountain. His branches shade the wall. He has been severely injured by those who shot at him and persecuted him, but their weapons were shattered by the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the rock of Israel. May the God of your fathers, the Almighty, bless you with blessings of heaven above and on the earth beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb, blessings of grain and flowers, blessings reaching to the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. These shall be the blessings upon the head of Joseph, who was exiled from his brothers. Benjamin is a wolf that prowls. He devours his enemies in the morning, and in the evening divides the loot. So these are the blessings that Israel, their father, blessed his 12 sons with. Then he told them, soon I will die. You must bury me with my fathers in the land of Canaan, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field Abraham bought from Ephron the Hethite for a burial ground. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. It is the cave which my grandfather Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. Then when Jacob had finished his prophecies to his sons, he lay back in the bed, breathed his last, and died. Genesis chapter 50, verse 1. Joseph threw himself upon his father's body and wept over him and kissed him. And afterwards he commanded his morticians to embalm the body. The embalming process required 40 days with a period of national mourning of 70 days. Then when at last the mourning was over, Joseph approached Pharaoh's staff and requested them to speak to Pharaoh on his behalf. Tell his majesty, he requested him, that Joseph's father made Joseph swear to take his body back to the land of Canaan, to bury him there, and ask his majesty to permit me to go and bury my father, and assure him that I will return promptly. Pharaoh agreed. Go and bury your father as you promised, he said. So Joseph went, and a great number of Pharaoh's counselors and assistants, all the senior officers of the land, as well as all of Joseph's people, his brothers and their families. But they left their little children in flocks and herds in the land of Goshen. So a very great number of chariots, cavalry, and people accompanied Joseph. When they arrived at Atad, meaning threshing place of brambles beyond the Jordan River, they held a very great and solemn funeral service with a 7-day period of lamentation for Joseph's father. The local residents, the Canaanites, renamed the place Abel Matzriam, meaning Egyptian mourners, for they said it is a place of very deep mourning by these Egyptians. So his sons did as Israel commanded them, and carried his body into the land of Canaan, and buried it there in the cave of Machpelah, the cave of Abraham, the cave Abraham had bought in the field of Ephron the Hethite, close to Mamre. Then Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to the funeral of his father. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers were frightened. Now Joseph will pay us back for all the evil we did to him, they said. So they sent him this message before he died. Your father instructed us to tell you to forgive us of the great evil we did to you. We, servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive us. When Joseph read the message, he broke down and cried. Then his brothers came and fell down before him and said, we are your slaves. But Joseph told them, don't be afraid of me. Am I God to judge and punish you? As far as I'm concerned, God turned into good what you meant for evil. For he brought me to this high position that I have today so that I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. Indeed, I myself will take care of you and your families. And he spoke very kindly to them, reassuring them. So Joseph and his brothers and their families continued to live in Egypt. Joseph was 110 years old when he died. He lived to see the birth of his son Ephraim's children and the children of Mechir, Manasseh's son, who played at his feet. Soon I will die, Joseph told his brothers, but God will surely come and get you and bring you out of this land of Egypt and take you back to the land he promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then Joseph made his brothers promise with an oath that they would take his body back with them when they returned to Canaan. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and they embalmed him, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt. This is the word of the Lord.